Hello and welcome to a Firstpost POV. There's a very interesting legal battle unfolding in Australia. Their government has decided to ban social media access for teens under the age of 16. Basically, teenagers under that age cannot access apps like Instagram or X or Twitter. Now, this has led to a very interesting legal challenge in the country, with two teenagers deciding to push back against this ban, which comes into effect on the 10th of December. And supporting them is a politician, John Ruddick, who's a member of the New South Wales Legislative Council, and he also heads the Digital Freedom Project. This group is basically challenging the ban in the Australian High Court and saying that this is a violation of free speech and also political association in the country. Joining me now is Mr. Ruddick to discuss what his case is in the court and why he disagrees with this ban, which seems to have captured the public imagination, not just in Australia, but across the world. Thank you so much, Mr. Ruddick, for speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I mentioned those two teens who are leading this fight, Noah Jones and Macy Nayland. Let's start by asking you, how did you come across them and how did you meet them, and how has your experience been of building this legal challenge along with them?
Okay, well, the Australian Federal Parliament passed a law this time last year that would ban social media for under-16s. Now, the law is due to come into effect in about a week from now. Now, we had been expecting that some of the big tech platforms, Facebook or Twitter or, Google, was going to challenge whether this court was constitutionally valid. And Google had publicly said that they would, or strongly hinted they would at least a couple of times. So now then we got to 2 months ago, and I represent the Libertarian Party, which is a very pro-free speech party, and no one was doing anything. And we phoned around the legal world and we said, look, is anybody launching a challenge here? And nobody knew anything about it. So we said, well, we will have to do it. So we put together a team of people, and within that circle, two people, the plaintiffs to the court case need to be people who are directly impacted by this legislation. So we needed two 15-year-olds. So that's how we came along with them. But look, our concern with the legislation is that it's going to, kids are going to get around the ban. That's the thing. Every school ground in Australia has been awash for weeks about how to get around this ban. So kids are still going to be able to access a lot of social media, but it will be underground social media. And the parents won't be supervising it because they think the government's taken care of it. So that's going to be a recipe for bad outcomes.
Right. Now, when you argue this case in court, what is the legal defense that your team is building? Is this a free speech argument? Is there something in the Australian law that you're hoping to invoke to reverse this? What is going to be your case in the court?
Okay, well, Australia became a country in 1901. Prior to that, it was 6 British colonies, and they came together, they got independence from Britain, and they started their own federal government, and it had a written constitution. Now, that constitution has been open for, it's been around now for, well over a century, and it's been debated. Now, it has been established in the 1990s that there is an implied freedom of political communication in the Australian Constitution. And so we're saying that a 16-year-old who will be voting soon, within a couple of years, that they do have the right to participate in political debate. Now, I know that most teenagers are not interested in politics, but a sizable minority are. And those people need to have access to political information, and this bill is going to very significantly reduce how much political information they can get.
But is it not true that, like you mentioned, most kids don't use social media for politics, and perhaps the ones who do are a very tiny minority, and therefore the ban is basically seeking to address bigger problems like mental health issues and bullying and things like that? So shouldn't the greater good effectively outweigh what is used by a tiny minority to access politics?
Well, no, I think the average 16-year-old, while it may be accurate that not a majority have a political interest, but I think it's quite a sizable minority. The world the world that they are going to inherit, they need to know about the politics that built the current world. So now you mentioned about harms on social media. Look, the internet is the greatest machine that mankind has ever built. And the internet is so vast and so big and such an important part of our lives that yes, there will be some bad aspects to it. Now, the question is, how do we best manage those potential harms? So the government is saying, well, we need censorship. That'll solve it if we have censorship. I think there needs to be a greater focus amongst parents and schools to educate children about the potential dangers of the internet. I think that is, if we outsource this paramount responsibility away from parents and send it to bureaucrats, I think it'll be a bad outcome.
Now, in the court, the argument basically is going to be about the implied rights of political communication. But the teens do seem to think that this is an assault on their free speech. So is the broader worry in Australia that, yes, the legal case is about the implied political communication, but the broader worry is that this is a curb on free speech, essentially?
Well, my party would support Australia adopting an American-style First Amendment, which absolutely explicitly says that the government cannot interfere with the free exchange of ideas. So I think that I think all countries need that type of protection.
Right.
So yes, so that would be the ideal. Now, look, Australia has always, thought of itself as a free speech country. I think after COVID, I think a lot of people who are desirous, people in the government who are desirous of a big bossy government, sort of got the view that they could get away with a lot more. And so that's why I think they're coming up with legislation like this, because the other very pernicious part of this legislation is that I believe it's the opening, it's the beginning of wider internet censorship in Australia and around the world. This is what they want to do. People in power do not want there to be a free exchange of ideas, because then maybe they'll lose power. So we need to fight hard to preserve the internet as separate to the state.
Right. Now, I'm just trying to put this in context with India, because here we do have freedom of expression, but the courts have repeatedly said that these are not absolute rights. So I wonder, applying the same logic there are limits to what under 16 people can do even in Australia. They can't vote, they can't buy alcohol, they can't drive. So why not put similar restrictions on these age group of people when it comes to social media, when repeated studies have found that there are harmful effects when there is unregulated use by teenagers, or especially in this age group below 16. Aren't these reasonable restrictions for any responsible state to put?
Well, you brought up the example of alcohol. So I think that we will all agree that when a teenager consumes alcohol, somebody under the age of 18, it's very likely to result in bad outcomes. Now, with social media, the vast majority of exchanges on social media are very wholesome. People talk about their homework, they talk about the birthday party next weekend, they talk about going to the beach next week. So they just sort of, it genuinely is social media. And most of these kids are in closed off little groups just with their friends from school. So nobody is denying that there are potential harms out there, but I think that most kids today are aware. Now, if the government gets its way and there'll be no kid on social media until the age of 16, it means that they'll be thrown into the deep end at the age of 16. They won't, if they've had their parent holding their hand and helping them navigate their way around social media for a couple of years, then they'll be able to spot things that look suspicious, scams and baddies. So it would be better we have to accept social media is a big part of our life, and I can't see that changing for a very long time. So it's an important part of growing up, is learning how to navigate social media.
Have you thought about what an alternative could look like? If it's not a ban on under 16 teenagers using social media, what would the alternative look like to ensure that the harmful effects of this internet phenomenon does not affect our young people? Does it come with educating our parents? Does it come with work in schools? Does it come with stricter regulations on the platforms themselves? What does an alternative or a middle path look like?
Well, look, I don't believe the government should be regulating the platforms, okay? Now, there should be a free market of platforms, okay? And some of those markets will very much cater towards younger kids, like Snapchat and other ones. So look, I do believe that there is one way to deal with this issue, one primary way, parental supervision. It should be a very high responsibility for any parent in today's world, in any country, to be extremely curious and, yes, intrusive into kids' social media behaviour. But look, I think on balance, we should realise social media is more than anything an educational tool. I mean, one of the websites that the government wants to ban is YouTube. YouTube is an enormous resource of information. And there might be 11-year-olds out there that really like physics or playing chess or chemistry or history or philosophy or economics. Some kids are very bright at a young age and they're going to learn what they're passionate about. Now, if somebody really loves physics or IT, they can go onto YouTube and they've got thousands of videos where they can learn a whole lot of stuff. And the government wants to ban kids being able to do that. And I think that's wrong.
Now, just to be clear, it's not really that kids cannot access YouTube anymore. It's that they cannot create accounts on YouTube and go down these rabbit holes of videos that could be of toxic content and content that could have an harmful impact on them. Without logging in or creating an account, they can still use YouTube, can't they?
Well, they can't have their own account, okay? So that means that they cannot curate YouTube to what they're interested in. And they can't have exchange in comments. They can't like things. So it is the government saying, no, YouTube is basically bad. So you look at it's hard. I mean, yes, people can still operate YouTube, but the government is saying that kids should not do that.
Right.
And I think YouTube is terrific. For whatever your interest is, there's things on YouTube that can help you learn more about your favourite subject.
Well, I agree. This conversation is going to go up on YouTube, so I agree. But a lot of the polls actually say that Australian public is actually supportive of this measure, and they actually do want some sort of restrictions, or in this case, a ban on under-16s accessing. How do you reconcile the popular opinion in Australia with your position on absolutism when it comes to free speech?
Well, you are correct that a year ago, when this was being debated, that the polls indicated that people were broadly in favour of it. Now, that's because they hadn't had any time to think about it. And the government sold it to people as, the government's protecting children. Everyone said, oh, well, that can only be a good thing. The government wouldn't get that wrong. But I think now that we are having a bit of a national debate about it, I think that people are starting to see, yes, no, there's a lot more to this. Now, the ABC, which is the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, they put out a poll recently. They polled 17,000 young people, and like 80% of them said, yeah, it's not going to work, people are going to get around it, and the government shouldn't have done this. So the people that are most impacted by it are very unhappy about it.
You spoke about big tech and how you would like this to be an area of free competition. But that brings me to my question of how the big tech industry or these platforms have behaved themselves. They have benefited from pushing contents or algorithms that effectively hook people onto what they're producing. Whether it's young people, old people, doesn't matter. They thrive on hooking you to their platforms. So unless and until we have a situation where big tech is acting responsibly or being mindful of the concerns of these young kids, isn't it pointless to push a system where they're free to do whatever they want? Because they will prioritize their profits and their traffic over anything else, even if that means it's the mental health of these young kids.
Well, look, I don't think there's much profit to be made out of under 16-year-olds. I mean,
well, in Australia, maybe not, but in countries like India or in Asia, this is a very big demographic we're talking about, and they are the ones who are going to probably end up using it for the rest of their life if they start at a young age.
Well, look, I mean, you're saying that the tech platforms, have an algorithm which feeds people what things that they're interested in. Well, it's better than feeding them things that they're not interested in. Now, look, the internet is still in its early phases, okay, and it's a very dynamic market. Now, what gave us the internet revolution, which has been good for India, good for Australia, good for the whole world? It was free market capitalism. It was Silicon Valley. It wasn't the government being involved, and it's still very, very diverse, and fortunes come and go. But it's very dynamic, and products keep getting better. Okay, so yes, the platforms could be doing better, but I don't think they will achieve that via being bullied into it by the government. I think the free market will sort that out with time, and there will be, like, there's this, I mean, my kids like the little social media platform called Snapchat. It's like just perfectly designed for kids, wholesome kids, okay, so, and there'll be more products which will be more niche. So, it wasn't long ago, the only social media out there was Facebook almost, and maybe Twitter. And now it's a much more diverse landscape, and that's a good thing.
Right. You mentioned at the start of the interview that you expected a lot of these tech firms to mount a legal challenge when this ban was implemented. Do you have any guesses as to why they haven't done that? Do they think they don't have a good case? Are they expecting public backlash? Why haven't those firms mounted the legal challenge that you are right now?
It's a good question, and I do not have the answer. So it's, they're very welcome to get behind our campaign. I would have thought that it's in their interest, because what Australia is doing here is setting a bad international precedent about more internet censorship. So that's why I'm surprised that they're not taking more of an interest. Australia is not like a major world power, but it's also not an insignificant country. We're a fairly respected middle power, and so what happens here can easily act as a precedent for other parts of the world.
Right. That brings me to my final question. There's a lot of questions around what your motive is, and after speaking to you, it's quite clear that you do support free market enterprise and these firms basically having a free run at the market and deciding how things go out themselves. Having said that, there are questions about where your funding comes from. So can you categorically tell us where your agency, the Digital Freedom Project, get its funding from? And is any of the big tech platforms on that list?
Well, look, they'd be very, very welcome to donate, but unfortunately at this stage I can say that we haven't received 1 cent from Silicon Valley.
Right.
So look, what had happened is when we gathered a few people about 2 months ago, some lawyers and some other people, and myself, people have indicated, people, private citizens who are motivated not by any commercial gain, but people who are motivated by, protecting free speech in Australia. That is their entire motivation. And since we've announced our High Court challenge, people can go to our website and people are making donations every day, which is all very helpful.
Right. Well, it's good to know that you're doing this of your own conviction, Mr. Ruddick, and that there is no vested interest behind this. And what's happening in Australia, like you said, a lot of countries are watching this closely because this is something that is a global problem. It's not limited to one country. So what happens in Australia could effectively give cues to other governments to do the same. And we could have a global debate on free speech and what amount of rights these young kids have going forward. Thank you so much, Mr. Ruddick, for speaking to us on Firstpost and explaining your issues with this law.
Thank you for your interest.
They promised glory. They delivered fear. They shaped nations. They scarred generations. From brutal purges to propaganda machines, from stolen power to violent falls from the throne. Welcome to The Dictator, a series that strips away the myth and then exposes the men behind the tyranny. History remembers their power. Firstpost reveals their truth.